for a nomination for a temporary chair.
I'm happy to.
Councillor Addis?
Yes, look, I'm happy to nominate Councillor Gold as the temporary chair.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Gillies?
Thank you, Mr. Wee.
Any opposition? In that circumstance, Councillor Gold is elected temporary chairperson.
Well, welcome everyone to tonight's meeting of the Services Delegated Committee. My name is Councillor Wesgolt, and for tonight I'll be chairing this committee meeting. Before we commence the meeting, I request that all mobile phones are switched off or to silent. The Services Delegated Committee meeting is being live streamed on the Council website, so you will be able to view the proceedings of the meeting, councillor deliberations, and voting. The meeting is also being recorded and will be made available on the Council website as soon as practical after the meeting. Should technical problems be encountered during the meeting will be adjourned until the problem is rectified, or if needed, the meeting will be postponed. I will start by introducing my fellow councillors and officers. Seated to my left at the horseshoe table is Councillor Jim Park, Councillor Cynthia Watson, Councillor Nick Stavro, Councillor Felicity Sinfield. On the other side of the table is Councillor Susan Bigeye, Councillor Di Gillies, and Councillor Jane Addis, our Mayor. The officers in attendance tonight are Philip Storer to my right, Carolyn McLean is behind Councillor Stavro. Daniel Freer is also behind Councillor Stavro. Mans Bassi is behind Councillor Gillies. Scott Walker is also behind Councillor Gillies. Amy Montalto is behind Felicity Sinfield. And Brian Wee is to my left, and to his left is Kirsten Ritchie. There are a number of other officers in attendance tonight, but we'll introduce those officers as they rise to present the various issues. So, as a general introduction, the purpose of the Services Delegated Committee is to deal with issues relating to the provision of human and physical services and council infrastructure. Now, I understand that there is nobody from the audience presenting tonight.
That's correct.
So we won't be going through the presentation requirements for that. Is there anything we need to say about that in the meantime? No, that's fine. So I'll move directly to apologies. Mr. Wee, are there any apologies for this evening?
Yes, Chair. Councillor Hollingsworth and Councillor Thompson are on leave of absence, and Councillor Franco is an apology.
Thank you. So we'll move to adoption of the previous minutes of our meeting, the Services Delegated Committee meeting on the 9th of May 22. Can I ask for a motion to accept those minutes? Councillor Gillies, could I have a seconder? Oh, you've got it. Thank you. So, are there any opposition to the minutes? So I declare the motion carried. Declaration of conflict of interest. Councillors and council officers, are there any conflicts of interest to be declared tonight? No, thank you very much. So we can move straight on to the agenda for the evening. Item 3.1 will be presented, the Kindergarten Infrastructure and Services Plan. The case will be presented tonight by Andrew McHugh Manager Health and Wellbeing Services. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The Victorian Government has recently introduced funding for 3-year-old kindergarten. Initially, the funding is for 5 hours per week, building up to 15 hours by 2029. Although Council does not operate kindergarten, it has 31 facilities that are leased to not-for-profit services who have kindergarten programs. The Victorian Government has developed kindergarten infrastructure and service plans, known as KISPs, for each local government, with forecasts related to supply and demand. The Victorian Government is seeking to sign a KISP with every local government authority in Victoria. To date, more than 70 of the 79 LGAs have signed a KISP. Officers have been negotiating with the Department of Education to update the KISP so it is clear that Council will not be responsible for any additional infrastructure required for the expansion of 3 or 4-year-old kindergarten, and that any support required for kindergarten services to change their programming is provided by the Victorian Government, not Council. The Department agreed to these changes and officers recommend Council signs the KISP. In addition, the Victorian Government last week announced some significant changes to kindergarten. Firstly, that kindergarten will be free for families from 2023, and 4-year-old kinder will increase from 15 hours to 30 hours over the next decade and be referred to as pre-prep rather than 4-year-old kindergarten. Although the KISP is not specifically related to the announcements made, reiterating Council's role in the KISP is important to make it clear this reform is not Council's responsibility. Thank you, and happy to take questions.
Councillor Addis.
Thanks very much, Chair. I've got a question about the ongoing costs. I understand that what's being proposed is an upfront payment for expansion, but it seems to me that then there's the ongoing potential maintenance cost of that expanded proportion, plus then at some time a renewal cost. And if it's not specifically addressed, that falls back to being ratepayers' responsibility to ongoingly maintain or renew.
Through you, Chair, the historical arrangements for kindergarten already has Council as being responsible for maintenance and renewal, and this includes many council buildings where it's already supporting 3- and 4-year-old services, and the focus of this KISP is around making sure that state government, rather than Council, will be responsible for any infrastructure required to accommodate 3-year-old, and that won't affect our historical arrangements in that we're already responsible for maintenance.
Any further questions?
Yeah. So...
Mr McHugh?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'd just like to add something to the question.
Okay. Just hang on a minute. Thank you.
So in the case where, for instance, an additional room would be required, then yes, that would require Council to provide maintenance for that actual expansion. I mean, at this stage, in terms of the KISP, we don't believe that's going to be onerous from a financial perspective, because we're looking at only a very few kinders that will need expansion, and that will be over quite a long period of time. So the demand analysis that is in the KISP shows that, in particular, Ashburton and Glen Iris will require a couple of expansions, but in terms of material effect, it's not going to be very onerous for Council. If we were perhaps a Casey or a Wyndham, where there's new communities
Just
all the
use the
time.
microphone. I'm having trouble hearing.
Sorry about that.
Thanks.
Would you like me to start again, Councillor Park?
Sorry, but yeah, probably yes.
Sure.
I think you said something about the cost implications, and that's what I'm
Yes.
particularly interested in hearing. Thanks.
Thanks for that. So, in terms of this KISP, this is only in relation to the 15 hours of 3-year-old kinder. The analysis that is in the KISP shows that there is only a very few number of kinders that will require expansion. So in terms of the costs of council maintaining perhaps an additional room in those few kinders, we don't believe that there's going to be an onerous financial impact for maintenance costs. If we were a council that was more perhaps in the growing areas like Greater Dandenong, Casey, Wyndham, then we believe that there'll certainly be quite a deficit of places, and so that will impact quite materially on those councils. And given we know that the numbers of babies being born is fairly stable in Burundara, we wouldn't expect that this will impact for the 15 years. But this recent announcement, which is not the subject of the KISP tonight, will need a great deal of thinking through and will certainly need a lot of advocacy, I would imagine.
Still have your light on, Councillor Addis. Any further questions?
Oh, sorry, it's just gone off magically. So can I clarify that we're not talking about this new initiative?
That's absolutely correct. So this was a very recent announcement. So this only pertains to the 15 hours of 3-year-old kinder. And I would imagine that it will take quite a bit of time in terms of a negotiation around how 4-year-old kinder going from 15 hours to 30 hours will be. And I would imagine it'll be a very different story than here, but we don't expect that there'll be more than 2 or 3 kinders that may need an additional room. However, the first line of defence, if you like, is for the kindergartens to look at their timetabling, because quite a few of them can actually accommodate these 15 hours if they look at how their timetabling works. So to answer the question around maintenance, we don't believe it's going to be onerous.
And sorry, can I just clarify? There's no way they can then use this agreement to accommodate the increase again, sort of say, well, you've signed the agreement, now we'll just...
The agreement is firmly worded around 3-year-old kinder only.
And should we want to increase something for maintenance or renewal, is that possible within this document?
Sorry, are you talking about the few kinders that will have a deficit of supply?
The ones that we might seek a grant for to accommodate an expansion.
Yes.
Is there some way that we could have a clause in this that would open up the possibility of money when we needed to renew them or maintain them?
So in terms of renewal, we'd be seeking an infrastructure grant, and we've been reasonably successful over the years getting them. The state government has never funded maintenance. I do think that the City of Burundara is very well placed in this document, having negotiated perhaps much longer than some other councils, to make sure that their responsibility is absolutely around providing money, and that council will not do an expansion unless that funding happens.
Thank you. Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, I won't throw a curly question to you, I promise. Mr Mayhew, I'm wondering whether you might be able to just clarify for me if any confidentiality deed has been sought by the government or department in relation to this that would necessitate this being recorded on our relatively new register of such deeds?
No, there's been no confidentiality deed requested. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillors, are there any further questions? There not being any further... Oh, my apologies, Councillor Watson, please.
Thank you, Chair. I had it on before. I don't know why my light suddenly went off. And I noticed that Councillor Park had his light on for a while and his light's gone off. So, yes. So, anyway, I'll get on with my question. Thank you very much, Chair. Councillor Addis was talking about the additional space in terms of the fact that it's going to be going to cost our ratepayers additional funds to maintain it. But then, of course, anything you build also gets old. And so an expanded building will have expanded needs at some point in time. So my question is really about our rent, because we do charge the department rent. Does our rent factor in things like the cost to maintain the buildings and also have essentially a sinking fund component that looks to the future where we know we are going to have to put money in to renew and upgrade buildings?
Thanks for the question. So all of the kinders are council-owned, so there is no rent payable. So the model here is that the community kinders are run by a local committee of management, and they're the ones who have a lease with council, which is a peppercorn lease.
Thank you for that. If I could have another follow-up question. So when we're considering a KISP, and I understand the leasing arrangements because I was a former president of a kindergarten, but given that the state government does have a part to play in kindergartens and the teaching of our children, might we consider in this KISP in the same manner that we charge a peppercorn rent, that we charge a ongoing fee that equates to some sort of essentially a rental type agreement that would capture maintenance and future capital expenses? Is that something we could put into the KISP agreement?
So the situation there is that if the Department of Education was going to pay for the maintenance of a council facility, that would need to happen across Victoria. There's been a fair degree of negotiations to this point in general with local government, and I don't believe that we would be able to negotiate that successfully as a one-off situation for Boroondara. And it's been very clear in negotiations in the past that it is a council building. So unfortunately that is a historic arrangement, and I very much doubt we would be able to get that in this agreement. What that would mean if the KISP is not signed is that Boroondara would not be eligible for the grant funding for any expansions for those few kinders, and that's been very clear in writing that we would be unable to get that state government funding. So those particular suburbs they would be unable to meet the demand for 3-year-old kinder for 15 hours a week.
All right, I'll leave my questions there with a comment like it sounds like cost shifting again. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sinfield.
If questions are done, and I'm not sure if they are, I was just going to suggest the officer's recommendation.
Councillor Park has his light on.
Thanks. I didn't turn it off, but it found itself off. Is there an estimate, in terms of the long-term financial strategy, is there an estimate of our likely expenditure on renewal and upgrades over the next 10 years? I see the report mentions 5. Have we got a number for 10?
My understanding is it is 5 years for renewal. There has been a substantial amount of renewal activity in our kinders, though, over the past 5 years. The cost itself would be in the renewal document for the 5 years, but I do not believe that would be in there for the 10 years.
Is there any view about whether after the next 5 years will be largely done for a period, or is that likely to, is the say 7 million we're forecasting likely to be replicated or sort of exceeded in the following 5 years?
I think we would need to have a good look at our renewals, the ones that have been done previously, because we have been busy, and look at the ones that are due in the next 5 years and come back with what that potentially would be.
Okay, and in the document, the KISP, as you've referred to it as, page 10 of that document, under the heading Other Information about the Expansion of Early Childhood Services. In reading that, I wondered if it's correct to infer that largely represents what we've had to say. That is, it's a record of what Council has had to say. Is that a reasonable inference?
Yes, that's correct.
Right. Yep. All right. And my final question is, it says for review in 2024. In the event that the wheels turn a little bit more quickly and we find ourselves with the effect of the announcements recently, I presume that there'd be a new document in any event.
Yeah, that would be our expectation, that because of the changes forecast late last week, that there'd need to be a separate process. They wouldn't be relying on this as a document because of the changes, and the assumption in this document would be changed other than Council's role.
Yeah. Thank you.
Before I return to Councillor Sinfield, are there any other questions? Councillors? No. Councillor Sinfield?
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Stavro? Thank you. Any opposition? Was that a...
I might.
You might. Councillor Sinfield, would you like to speak to your motion? Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I think the officers have done an exceptional job in negotiating the best outcome they can here for not just our next generation, but also for the ratepayers. I think we've been prudent in taking the time that officers have in considering this and attempting to put us in the best position we can. So I think this is really quite administrative in nature, and I don't know that much more needs to be said about that. I'll leave my comments there.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Councillor Stavro, do you want to speak now or hold your comments for later?
Look, I'll speak now.
Thank you.
Look, I think I agree with what Councillor Sinfield said eloquently there, and the only real issue is what Councillor Addis alluded to earlier, and given the response that really the additional cost for building construction is not going to be a huge amount, therefore the maintenance costs are not going to be that big. I think the officers have done enough work for me to think that officers' recommendation is the appropriate way to go. Thank you.
Councillor Addis.
Look, I certainly acknowledge that the officers have done a lot of work, and I really commend them for getting us into this much better position, but I still do feel quite uneasy about just another opportunity for us to absorb ongoing costs. It keeps happening, and I just don't know when we say, well, no, we're not doing it. Plus all the other implications of, if we expand, it uses up green space, our community's green space. It just feels like this is a real impost. So I guess I have some comfort that it will be revisited in 2 years. I just don't know. I'll think about how I vote.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. I also have a great deal of unease about this particular arrangement and this particular motion, and this is not saying anything about the officers and what they've been able to negotiate with the state government, but it's more cost shifting. I don't think that this was well thought through in terms of talking with local government and understanding the implications for cost, and also on the ability of local government to even deliver the assets that were needed. So I believe I will not be supporting this motion, but it really is maybe it's a virtue signal or a protest vote to say that this just isn't the way that good governance happens, and that there really should have been some proper reports done and discussions with local government so that this went through in an orderly way, rather than, as I fear that may happen between now and November, in a highly political way. That's not to say that I don't support children in kindergarten. It's just that I just don't think that this is what good government looks like. So I won't be supporting the motion tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Park.
I'm inclined to support the motion because I think that the document needs to be signed. I mean, that's clear, because otherwise the effect is that ratepayers will be even worse off because we're ineligible for funding grants. So we're in that situation where there really isn't any palatable alternative. Perhaps, though, I well understand the sentiment of those who've spoken against, and I think that probably the cure would be to add an additional dot point that notes the committee's grave concerns about the ongoing inadequacy of state government funding. That way we could express that sentiment whilst still having support for signing the document. If there was, so I'll leave it to the mover to consider.
I see no other lights on, so I might return to Councillor Sinfield for wrap-up comments or comments on those comments.
Thank you, Chair. In light of the comments, I'm happy to include such an additional point as raised by Councillor Park. I too have reservations, but the options are few and far between here. So if I might suggest that officers come up with such wording to incorporate at perhaps point 2.
We'll have a break for a moment while they do so.
Happy to adjourn for a moment if you wish, although I anticipate it'll be fairly quick.
Okay.
So,
pretty quick. We'll just take. Councillor Stavro, are you happy to go with those recommendations?
With the
The
additional-
alteration to the motion?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. It's fine.
Chair, while officers are crafting that additional point for us, I wonder whether it might be prudent to also add in the MAV as a recipient of a letter. If Councillor Stavro is happy with that inclusion as well.
I am.
Councillor Sinfield, the motion or the officers' recommendations have now been amended. Are you prepared to support those?
Yes, I'm satisfied with that wording. Councillor Park, does that meet your needs? Through you, Chair.
Councillor Stavro? Seconded, thank you. So we'll put that motion to the vote. All in support? None against, thank you. Carried. So we'll move to item 3.2, the North East Link, Spark Urban Design and Landscape Plan Submission. Tonight, the officers' recommendations will be presented by Claire Davey, Senior Coordinator, Transport Advocacy.
Thank you. Thank you, and through you, Chair. Councillors, thank you for your time tonight. So the report tonight presents Council's draft submission to the Spark Consortium developed North East Link Tunnels Urban Design and Landscape Plan, or UDLP, for your consideration and hopefully endorsement. Spark was awarded the tunnels package contract in October 2021. The package of works includes the detailed design and construction of the North East Link twin tunnels and the concept design only of the northern and southern interface zones. In Boroondara, the southern interface zone includes the North East Link Eastern Freeway and Bulleen Road interchange, the Eastern Freeway from Musker Street Reserve to Estelle Street Footbridge in the east, the approximate western third of the Coonung Creek Reserve, parts of the Freeway Golf Course and the Boroondara Tennis Centre land. The UDLP was put on public exhibition for 21 calendar days, which is the absolute minimum public exhibition period allowed for any North East Link related UDLP. 3 hard copies of the 519-page document were available at the Camberwell and Baldwin libraries, as well as the Greythorn Community Centre, so as close as possible to the project area. To inform the draft submission, which is attachment 1 to the report tonight, council officers engaged with and listened to the community through a survey about what the community values and wants to see in the Coonung Creek Reserve, as well as other conversations as well. We heard from the Ruinella Community Group, which has been in action, I guess, since 2017. We've heard from the Boroondara Bicycle Users Group, so thank you to those that have been in touch with us, and also individual residents as well. There are a few key issues identified in the UDLP from our review and our community conversations, including the lack of consideration of the human scale of the project and the impacts, the inclusion of a Coonung Creek Reserve concept design, despite the commitment from the state government to a master plan for the whole of the Coonung Creek Reserve, the southern interchange scale and bulk and the impacts that has on sensitive residential areas to the south, the complexity of the southern interchange, and also the lack of foresight to future-proof cycling and pedestrian infrastructure through mode separation, lack of lighting and on-road protection for any of the cycle lanes that they're putting in. So these and other issues, along with opportunities, have been identified and documented in the draft submission for your consideration tonight. Thank you, and happy to take questions.
Before I seek any questions, I need to point out that we've had a submission from Glynis Jones. She is in support of the plan as proposed, but doesn't wish to speak tonight. So, councillors, are there any questions? Councillor Stavro.
Thank you, Councillor Gold. Just a question on the cycling and pedestrian paths. Sort of expand a little bit of their proposal and how that could fall short about future-proofing objectives there, and also whether it inhibits our bicycle strategy in any way going forward.
Certainly, thank you, and through you, Chair. Part of the Coonung Creek Reserve survey did actually ask the question of does the community prefer mode-separated paths or shared paths? The overwhelming majority, I think it was 83 or 84%, supported separated paths. So that is one part of the conversation in this space. The Spark concept design shown in the UDLP really doesn't deliver any of that potential future-proofing. It provides one path, which they label as the Coonung Creek Trail. It's a meandering trail that goes through forested areas, over a creek a couple of times, so it's definitely not fit for purpose as a commuter trail, and definitely, I guess, removes the ability to widen or other options to cater for any future demands. So the UDLP design is entirely deficient in terms of that future-proofing of walking and cycling infrastructure.
Any further questions, Councillor Stavro? My apologies.
Through you, Mr Chair, if I may add, in respect to the cycling strategy in its draft form has identified this as a commuter corridor along the northern part of the city, and has been, I guess, quite a focus as part of that to ensure that that is a commuter corridor through this parkland as an appropriate space to ensure that commuter cyclists are using the appropriate mode separated path through this area.
Any further questions, Councillor Stavro? There are.
One more, and through you, Councillor Gold. In terms of the heightened visual impacts of the ventilation tower, are there any provisions, and I'm going to have to contextualise this, going forward, I am assuming that electric cars are going to be the norm and ventilation is not going to be as required as it is now. Are there any provisions to unwind that and convert it into some sort of form of open space? Because I do believe that open space has been taken out now to create that ventilation.
Through you, Mr Chair. In short, no. There has been no provision for future-proofing of that ventilation facility. It is designed as part of the works that are proposed and would appear to want to stay there as part of those works and not be reduced into the future.
Another question, Councillor Stavro?
Qualifier. Would I be right in thinking that currently it's open space that would be taken to create the ventilation structure?
Yes, through you, Chair. Yes, that is correct. It will be taking up part of Bulleen Oval number 1 in that Bulleen Park precinct.
Thank you.
No further questions? Councillor Park?
Just to foreshadow moving the officer's recommendation.
Before we go to that, if I could just ask a question, if you wouldn't mind. During the presentation by Spark, I did ask the question about the exhaust plumes coming out of that funnel, and they did promise to give us some information on that. Are you aware that they've provided that?
Through you, Chair, answering your own question. No, they have not.
Thank you. Excuse me. Do you have an amendment to make?
No, not unless you want to suggest one to the mover, but right now you've got Councillor Bigger wanting to speak.
Councillor Bigger, you wish to speak.
I do, thank you. Thank you for this report. I just had a question about you make comments about the helicopter viewpoints, which I agree are sort of a particular way of looking at the structure, particularly the ventilation structure, and you say that it's, seems to be sort of deliberately playing down the visual bulk and dominant nature of the southern ventilation structure. I'm just wondering, and I think that seems quite fair, a fair assessment, but what would you like to see, or what are we hoping for out of, in terms of response from them?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Bigger, and through you, Chair. What we're hoping to receive in response to the comments about the diminishing, I guess, the impact and the size and scale of some of their structures, is to receive human eye level viewpoints so that we can understand for our residents south of the freeway, particularly those on Mountain View Road, Orion and Columba and Leonis, just exactly what they will be looking at when they look out their front door, their front window every single morning. So yes, a very human level of detail is what we're after, not this helicopter, you know, no one's going to be seeing that in reality point of view.
If I may, can I just follow on? Follow-on question.
Please do.
And I agree, and this seems to be a really fundamental problem. Have residents, I'm sure some residents have raised this, have they received any more? I thought we were told that they would get some sort of detailed scale or vision themselves from their front door kind of thing. Has any of that been achieved, and has this been an issue that residents have raised as well?
To the best of our knowledge, they haven't received that. And it is an issue that the residents and park users have raised with us, that they just don't understand the impact on them personally from either their residents, their residential property, or from the parkland, the Coonung Creek Reserve that they use. They just simply don't understand what they will be actually looking at, because they can't, from the 519 A3 pages, which are very dense, very detailed, they just can't basically get a read on what they're going to be seeing.
Any further questions? Councillor
One last one about the timelines. I know we had raised some concerns about the short timeline for the consultation. Was that something that, have we had feedback from residents that they found that inadequate, or were they able to achieve that, their submissions in that time?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. All the feedback we received was that the 21 days of public exhibition was completely inadequate in their opinion, that it didn't enable them sufficient time to review, read and understand the 519 pages, and that they really did need a lot more time. And a couple of residents also raised the Bulleen Park and Ride public exhibition period as a comparison, and asked that we recommend it be a longer time like that one was.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you for your work on this.
Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions. I concur with the comments that have already been raised. It's certainly been a truncated timeline that's certainly far from adequate for our community. The height of the ventilation stack, I had a conversation earlier with Mr Freer in relation to this. Just to compare apples with apples, are you able to clarify for me, please, Ms Davey, the height of the proposed North East Link stack? Is it from bitumen level, or is it from grade level into the air? And then compared with the Mullum tunnel, where they were, I recall, the North East Link project team trying to contextualise things for us. That, when I drove through it the other day, I noticed goes from the bitumen, not from an air bridge, into the air.
Thank you, Councillor Sinfield, and through you, Chair. As we understand it from our read of the information in the UDLP, the height of the structure is 53 metres from ground level. So if you were standing in the Marcellin College fields, it would be 53 metres above you. I understand Eastlink, the ventilation stacks there are 45 metres from the actual road level of Eastlink itself.
So it's quite misleading to compare one to the other when one starts below the natural ground level and the other is at what is current natural ground level. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yes, I would agree with you there. And the ventilation stack at the North East Link is about a 17-storey building in terms of height.
Thank you. And a second question, if I may, Chair. On behalf of Councillor Hollingsworth, who's unable to join us tonight, she has asked numerous times previously and been given mixed responses from the North East Link project team in relation to a toilet to accommodate people utilising the new public open space and the cycle trails that will be present there. Do we have a response from the project team yet as to whether they will accommodate that, which they've previously noted as an oversight?
Through you, Chair, we have not had a response to that question.
Thank you. No further questions. Thanks,
Thank
Chair.
you. Return to Councillor Park. Do you still wish to move a motion?
Thank you. I might just ask one question that arose out of that. Subsequent to our meeting with the authority, did they actually provide any responses to anything that we asked? It's sounding like they perhaps didn't.
Thank you, Councillor Park. Through you, Chair. No, they didn't provide any direct answers. We have had ongoing conversations as part of our regular fortnightly catch-ups, but nothing in direct response to the questions raised.
How do you stand on a motion?
Sir, through you, Chair. I believe the officer has a administrative amendment to the motion, to the recommendation before we put it through. If you'd like to speak to it.
Yes, thank you.
That's
Through
fine.
you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Wee. And apologies for this, councillors. I did just need to add the two items, A and B, listed there onto part one of the recommendation. We did omit, unfortunately, in the first draft and the second and third draft, the trail and path lighting element, which we would like to include should councillors agree to that. Yes, thank you.
I'm happy to incorporate that in the motion I move. I am inclined to add a point 3, which expresses council's concern about the failure to provide any responses to the questions posed at that meeting. I just want to check how much time has elapsed since that. I'm just not sure offhand.
Thank you, Councillor Park. Through you, Chair. It's around about 6 weeks, so that meeting was the 5th of the 5th.
Then perhaps if we could include in there point 3, right to, is it Mr. Elliott, or should there be just Mr. Elliott? Yes, so right to Mr. Duncan Elliott, etc. Noting that noting the committee's disappointment that no responses have been received in respect of any of the questions posed by councillors at the meeting on whatever the date was, and committees will need to be possessive. I'm happy with the Chair's indulgence to take any feedback in the... Is that...
Yeah, sure. Could I? The only a couple of items that I have feedback on would be around the cycling and the ventilation structure, particularly the ventilation structure. I mean, I would like to see some form of, I guess, more prescriptive as to what we want, and particularly in both of those 2 points. I think that, you know, we've got a lot of time and thought and action around climate change, and we know things are going to go in a particular way, and I think that that's not considered when those two elements of the design are put in place. So I would like to see something that is a little bit more strong, particularly given that, you know, we're thinking that ventilation is not going to be a big issue in the future, or at least they could have come back with a response to tell us otherwise.
Councillor Stavron, I think we're entering into debate now. Rather than letting the mover finish the motion, have we got a motion which we can discuss at this point in time?
Where would you like me to add those points?
I just want to hear we've got a motion first.
It could it could perhaps be if you know were prepared to extend the latitude, it could be treated as a question to officers and then I could hear the answer and use that to assist in formulating a motion. The officers will, I presume, will either say it's too difficult to incorporate or something else, and in which case.
To assist the mover, can we comment? Are you happy to comment on that?
Can I suggest that we start with this? I think this is a reasonable proposition to include, and the best thing to do is to have it moved, get a seconder, then if there is some refinement of it, we can proceed on the basis there's actually a motion before the group.
Are you happy to do that, Councillor Park?
Sure.
Okay. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Sinfield?
Happy to second.
Fantastic. Now, any comments on the motion as it currently stands? Councillor Stavro.
Can we add to the part about the ventilation structure that it be provisions be made for it to be designed in the future to be compliant with electric vehicles, or to be consistent with electric vehicles not requiring as much ventilation?
I wouldn't propose to incorporate that into my motion. I think the problem there is that it's trying to design, it's councillors trying to design mechanical services.
I shall take further comments from other councillors if you so desire. Councillor Bigger?
Comments about that particular amendment?
Councillors about the current motion. Councillor Stavro has given us comments. Or you can council.
So I would support the current motion, not with the addition. I think it's too much detail, and we probably need to really. It feels like we're making policy decisions on the run, and I trust that the officers would have given this quite a lot of thought. So I probably would not be comfortable with that additional amendment.
Councillor Sinfield, you have your light on again.
Yeah, I'm just contemplating the opportunity for a media release in relation to this, but perhaps that's best discussed in general business rather than incorporated into the motion.
Okay. Any further comments from councillors? Councillor Park, would you be happy if we move your motion now?
Yeah, so moved.
Thank you.
The next step after this is to put the motion if there are no further speakers.
Councillor Watson, you've got your light on.
Happy to second.
Thank you.
It's already been moved and seconded.
Moved and seconded. Has been.
It's well and truly moved over to get that much support.
All right, all those in support of the motion as it currently stands.
I'll speak to it very briefly. And probably my views on this are well reflected in paragraph number 3. One can't help but be concerned that the North East Link Authority is not serious about consultation, but rather is going through the motions. And for 6 weeks to have elapsed since our meeting, where they said and did all the right things, but then did nothing following that in terms of getting back to us, is gravely disappointing. Obviously, one of the key messages that councillors left them with was that we were concerned about the inadequacy of the consultation period. That obviously fell on deaf ears, and it really is concerning because the authority seems hell-bent on pushing ahead with its plans regardless of community concern, reflected not only by community members but by various local governments, including this one. So I'd hope that as a consequence of the feedback that they're given, that they have a serious rethink, and that perhaps Mr Elliott, when he next visits us, can be explaining why it is that we heard nothing in respect of the various items on which we sought further detail and the comments that we made, because I think this is going to be a very long process, and it's fairly disingenuous if we find that we're simply disregarded.
Councillor Stavro, I noticed you had your light on at one stage. Do you wish to comment further?
No, I wasn't sure where you are in the actual proceedings. I was opposed to the motion, but
The debate had finished, but we're just seeing if there's any further comments you need to make at this time. Thank you. Does the seconder wish to comment further?
Well, it's unopposed, but with your indulgence, I will.
Thank you.
Oh, is it?
Close the debate, okay. No, we've decided to close the debate. I'll put the motion.
no. It's opposed.
Nick just indicated he was opposed and wanted to speak against, I think, Chair.
What you've got is Councillor Park was the mover. He has spoken. If the seconder hasn't spoken, the seconder has an opportunity to speak. That will then give Councillor Park the chance to speak again if he wishes to close the motion.
Excuse me one sec. What about Councillor Stavro?
So, Councillor Stavro is in a situation where he now has to vote for or against the motion. Yeah.
Okay. Right, if we can return to it. You can choose how you vote in a minute, Councillor Stavro. Councillor Sinfield, do you want to speak further at this point in time?
I might reserve my right until the opposing councillor has spoken.
Nick Stavro, could you please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Councillor Gold. Look, I understand that it's going to have the numbers and it's going to go through, and it's probably something that we have to do. But I am actually very disappointed, as my fellow councillors really are, at the way that we are run roughshod, and none of the questions that we've put, particularly on crucial matters. And I think that there are a couple of things there that are included in those two bullet points that I chose to highlight. That one, my community has spoken to me strongly on those two, particularly the cycling, and secondarily the actual ventilation structure. And I think that consistency is an important thing, and we are talking and trying to ensure that people are putting together a couple of things: climate change and health issues. And both of those are included in the bicycle aspects, and they are not considered. And secondly, there should be more thought around about the ventilation structure and how they can actually return it to open space. And fundamentally, there has been absolutely no attempt to respond to those questions by the project, and on that basis, I can't support it.
Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. I think North East Link are dancing to the beat of their own drum here. Frankly, their idea of consultation is an absolute farce. The timing of their supposed consultation period coinciding with the federal election is absolutely insufficient for our community to genuinely hear and take on board their comments. That's been echoed by the community feedback and sentiments passed on by Ms Davey tonight, who suggested that the community felt as though it was inadequate. The magnitude of this is phenomenal. A 17-storey building on Spaghetti Junction in the Eastern Freeway is flying under the radar here. This is massive, and it's not getting the mainstream media attention that it deserves. The debate has been shut down, and the North East Link project team are absolutely failing to listen to our community. I think we have a media opportunity here to shed some light on this, and I'll raise that further in general business. I welcome the addition of Councillor Park's third point, and I think that's important. I'll leave my comments there.
Thank you. I'll pass back to you, Councillor Park, to wrap up the debate.
Thank you. Notwithstanding what the sentiment that Councillor Stavro expressed, I'd urge all councillors to vote for this motion, because I think unanimity of voice is important in this matter, and I don't think there's actually a great deal of difference in the substance of what we're saying. This resolution, the first paragraph, is by no means an endorsement of the authority's plans. It's actually endorsing the submission that's been prepared on our behalf, and so I'd strongly urge that we send that message with absolute unanimity, because I think it's important that we express it in that fashion. Thank you.
I will now put the motion. Those in support? Unanimous. Thank you, Chamber. Sorry? Thank you. All right, thank you very much for your indulgence. We will now move to general business. Councillor Sinfield, I understand before you foreshadowed an item of general business.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I wonder if the CEO might provide some guidance as to whether it's something that should be discussed further offline, or whether perhaps it be dealt with now if the CEO would prefer a resolution in relation to a media statement.
Through you, Mr Chair, we don't really need a resolution. I understand unless there's an objection around the table, we would be quite comfortable preparing a media statement for the Mayor to make. All councillors will get to see a copy of that, of course. But I do think there is some value in highlighting particularly the height of that exhaust stack, or to call it more kindly a ventilation stack, so that people do understand that it is a massive structure, particularly in a context where what's around it doesn't represent anything of that height. If this was in parts of metropolitan Melbourne where you've got structures of 12 to 15 stories in height, it might actually fit, but it is a significant structure.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to leave it at that in the CEO's hands and not formulate a motion to that effect.
Thank you. Any other items of general business, councillors? No, thank you. Urgent business. Any items of urgent business? Tonight, have we any items of confidential business?
Through you, Chair, we don't.
Thank you. I will then move to close the meeting. Before I close the meeting, I want to thank all of you who joined us online this evening, and wish you and your families good health. I declare the Services Delegated Committee meeting closed. Thank you.
Do we want...